Welcome to another informative episode of the Chamwada Report. This time round, the show comes to you from Johannesburg in South Africa. This is the Nelson Mandela Edition. On today's program, how South Africans marked Nelson Mandela's centenary celebrations.
Love comes more naturally to the human heart. Let's remember that truth.
And what are Kenyans in South Africa doing to keep Madiba's legacy alive?
This year we've got 3 initiatives, all around children, children-based institutions.
Kenya-South Africa ties, what you need to know.
When you look at the interaction, people-to-people interactions, the business-to-people, it's really trade that drives this relationship.
But first, let's have the fact sheet.
The fact sheet today looks at political and social-economic landscape of South Africa. South Africa is considered to be the second largest and most industrialized economy in Africa after Nigeria, according to the World Bank. The current population of South Africa is estimated to be 57 million. Nelson Mandela was the first black president in South Africa. The current president is Cyril Ramaphosa, who was elected by the National Assembly in February this year following the resignation of Jacob Zuma. Johannesburg is the largest city in South Africa, but the administrative capital is Pretoria. It is in Pretoria where you will find the Kenyan High Commission. The embassy also serves the Kingdom of Lesotho and Swaziland.
Wow, so beautiful office.
Jean Kamau is the current Kenyan ambassador in South Africa.
We have a good-sized number of Kenyans here. We estimate probably between 25,000 to 40,000, depending, of course, by how well they register with the High Commission and how they are captured by, by data. When you look at the interactions, people-to-people interactions, the business-to-people, it's really trade that drives this relationship. So in terms of how the Kenyans can benefit from this is there are many business opportunities that flourish between our two countries. Manufacturing potential, for example. So there's a lot to learn. So we find, just the kind of activities already interesting for Kenyans is to come here and take up opportunities within their technology.
Cape Town is the second most populous urban city in South Africa. Recently, Kenya Airways launched non-stop flights to Cape Town as a way of asserting its presence and expanding connectivity across Africa.
One of the best indicators of our success in this economy, of course, is our airline. Kenya Airways does amazing business between Kenya and South Africa, and they're the channel that bring the people. They're the ones that move the goods and services. And so that's, again, even for the South Africans now, looking for new markets for their products, looking for new opportunities, they use our carrier, and that's really significant. Currently, we have 4 flights a day between Nairobi and Joburg, 2 flights a day between Nairobi and Cape Town, and that's not, a small traffic between the two countries.
Since 2003, global leaders have always seized the opportunity during Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture to address some topical issues affecting South Africans and Africans in general. This year, the event registered an attendance of over 15,000 people in Wanderers Stadium. And at this point, let's have a look at the highlights of that particular event. Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture is organized by Nelson Mandela Foundation. The lecture series invites prominent people to drive debate on significant social issues. Previous speakers include Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Nobel laureate Wangari Maathai, Microsoft founder and philanthropist Bill Gates, among others. The 2018 Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture, in partnership with Motsepe Foundation, was delivered by former US President Barack Obama in Johannesburg. And all these people had varied expectations for the lecture.
For me, I'm expecting a sense of global unity to come from his speech and to essentially highlight key issues that are facing African countries particularly, and how we can go about putting action towards all these empowerment talks and talks about bringing countries together.
I'm glad to be here. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. And this is a vindication of all that President Mandela fought for. And I expect the first African-American president of the United States of America to wax eloquent in paying tribute to the Republic of South Africa's first African president, Nelson Mandela.
My expectation is what Barack Obama is going to say about leadership in Africa and what Mandela means to that leadership.
The stage was all set.
Please help me welcome the chairman of the Nelson Mandela Foundation of Trustees, Professor Njabulo Ndebele.
And one by one, they took their positions. Accompanying the former US president was the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Graça Machel. The lecture's theme was renewing the Mandela legacy and promoting active citizenship in a changing world.
We see how Madiba inspired a young Barack Obama.
It focused on creating conditions for bridging divides, working across ideological lines and resisting oppression and inequality.
Now, as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of his birth, we are called upon not only to uphold his values and to emulate his humility and his selflessness. We are called upon by Madiba to be active in the struggle for a better South Africa, a better Africa, and a better world. Madiba's enduring legacy is that he expects us to fight for the interests of the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. We are called upon by Madiba to prosecute a progressive struggle against inequality, racial discrimination, ethnic chauvinism, and patriarchy.
Mandela's widow, Graça Machel, said Madiba's centenary was an opportunity to celebrate him in all his incredible uniqueness and also to celebrate him as a representative of a broader collective leadership that had led South Africa and South Africans to freedom.
To honor Madiba's legacy is to search and find in every one of us those values and strengths that enable us to go beyond ourselves, to embrace the bigger causes, to take risks, to make sacrifices for what is right, to be in service to others so that every single human being lives with dignity and in freedom.
Then came the moment that everyone was waiting for.
Please help me welcome the former president of the US, President Barack Obama.
In his speech, Obama tracked the enormous socio and democratic progress the world has made in the 100 years between Mandela's 1918 birth and 2018.
The introduction of market-based principles in which previously closed economies, along with the forces of global integration powered by new technologies, suddenly unleashed entrepreneurial talents to those that once had been relegated to the periphery of the world economy, who hadn't counted. Suddenly they counted. They had some power. They had the possibilities of doing business. And then came scientific breakthroughs and new infrastructure and the reduction of armed conflicts. And suddenly, 1 billion people were lifted out of poverty. And once starving nations were able to feed themselves. And infant mortality rates plummeted. And meanwhile, the spread of the internet made it possible for people to connect across oceans. And cultures and continents instantly were brought together. And potentially, all the world's knowledge could be in the hands of a small child in even the most remote village. That's what happened just over the course of a few decades.
Talking of progress, Obama cautioned that the world now stood on the brink of letting go of all this progress. He therefore called on the world to be Madiba's legacy.
Madiba reminds us that no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. Love comes more naturally to the human heart. Let's remember that truth.
It turned out to be an annual lecture of its kind. Some organizations were opposed to Barack Obama's invite to deliver the lecture, claiming Obama's principles were contrary to those of Nelson Mandela. But the foundation could hear none of that.
Barack Obama, having been inspired by Madiba himself, having spoken so fondly about the man, having framed and structured his own leadership style around how Madiba used to solve problems and lead in his spaces, we thought this is the right person to come to South Africa and the African continent and talk about a person we all hold so dear.
And with that, Obama had the last laugh. And at this point, we take a short break, but don't go away. Still to come.
Standing in the front line and saying, I'm prepared to die, makes me believe that Madiba was one of a kind.
Welcome back to the program. In case you are just joining us, this is the Nelson Mandela Edition. On this second part of the show, we want to bring the conversation closer home by looking at Kenya-South Africa ties so that you can understand why South Africa matters to Kenyans. We are also going to look at what Kenyans in South Africa are doing to keep Madiba's legacy alive. And so at this point, let's understand what Madiba's legacy is all about. Nelson Mandela, a South African anti-apartheid leader, a political leader and a philanthropist who served as president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. His story resembles that of a movie script, and we begin this second part of the show by looking at this prolific world leader who weakened and later overcame the oppressive nature of apartheid in South Africa. And what a better way of understanding the life of Nelson Mandela other than visiting Nelson Mandela Foundation. In here, you will even find some of the letters that were smuggled from Robben Island where Madiba was jailed, and they are in his own handwriting.
This is a space that Madiba created as part of his post-presidential office. This is where he would come. And all of his stuff was here, and of course it developed to become a center of memory because there's a lot of history that is interweaved with Madiba's story. So you'll see that most of what we see here is Nelson Mandela's story from birth to the time he passed. But of course, that story is linked with other parts or other chapters of the South African political history. And you'll find all of that here told in different ways, either in words, video, audio, or sometimes in exhibition. So we are telling that story in this particular space in a permanent exhibition that tells the life and times of Nelson Mandela. That when he went to school for the first day, the teacher said, no, Kgolehlahla is not the name you'll use. Going forward, you'll be Nelson. So
he may be no more, but his legacy lives on.
To be in Sandton, we book them at this particular...
From the high-end streets of Sandton to the cluster of townships in Johannesburg, the locals here remember Madiba with nostalgia.
Nelson Mandela fought for this country. He fought for the black people. He fought for the children. He loved the children. The most important thing that he wished, maybe it was for the children not to get hungry.
I used to think that the most thing that people take lightly about Madiba is, you know, standing in the front line and saying, I'm prepared to die for the values I believe in. And saying that in a courtroom, and saying that at the time when he was, you know, facing a judgment by the court, in fact, the sentencing by the court, to be that kind of a leader that actually can confront the system in that way makes me believe that Madiba was one of a kind.
Shadrach Katu is perhaps one of the Kenyans who understand Madiba's life in a special way. He served as the manager of information systems at Nelson Mandela's post-presidential office at the Nelson Mandela Foundation in Johannesburg. He describes Madiba as a special leader.
The way I describe him is beyond the... There's what Madiba is as a myth. And there are all kinds of stories that are told about Madiba, the mythical figure. My personal views are Madiba was an ordinary man who chose to do extraordinary things. And he did them in ways that are very inspiring, especially to myself. It was an amazing experience. I worked there for almost 5 years, 4 years full-time, and then the last one I did a little bit of consulting with them. We had amazing experiences just doing work around his life, telling stories about what they had to go through, him and his comrades. It's one thing he always reminded us. He said, my foundation is not about me. My foundation is about the struggles of the African people in South Africa and the stories of his comrades.
Nelson Mandela has always been recognized as a leader who fought for equality and freedom for all. That was his dream, but it seems his dream is far from being a reality. South Africa is still grappling with issues of economic transformation, land reform, racial inequality, and rampant corruption. This is the other side of South Africa. From Nelson Mandela Foundation, I head to Alexandra, a township in Johannesburg, where I come face to face with the issue of inequality.
ACFS is an organization that started in 1945 by the priest Father Huddleston. He started by cooking soup for the poor until we had 12 centers, 5 centers in the East End, and 6 centers in one center in the West End, and 6 in Soweto. But today we closed 5 centers in the East End because of financial constraints. We left with 6 centers in Soweto and 1 center, this one, in Alexandra. I wish people who had money or rich people could share this seriousness with us. You know, could maybe donate to us. You know, it is so difficult for a child to sleep without food.
Centers such as this one in Alexandra do rely on well-wishers and donors. On this particular day, they are lucky. A Kenyan group has come visiting. This team, which goes by the name Friends of Golf, is part of a larger group, Kenyan diaspora in South Africa, KEDASA.
We have a monthly golf day every month, and then every person who comes to play does a charity contribution of 100 rand in every game. And so we collect that amount, and which we use for different charity initiatives. And so this year we've got 3 initiatives, all around children, children-based institutions. Having lived here in South Africa, we've realized that one of the major problems we have here is fatherless families. And so we find there are a lot of kids who don't know their fathers or don't live with their fathers. And that has resulted in a problem as far as children are concerned. So you find that a place like here, there'll be a lot of parents, single parent families, and where the mothers are not employed or don't have means. And so the kids kind of get very vulnerable. And so our focus has been mainly on children.
Even as KEDASA, we support the associations that have an interest in that. So we went to ACFS in Alexander, a home where children go for feeding and to be looked after. We supported FOG in that initiative.
The inequality problem is a complicated issue in South Africa, and so Obama's message during the Nelson Mandela annual lecture appeared to be well-timed.
It is a plain fact that racial discrimination still exists in both the United States and South Africa. And it is also a fact that the accumulated disadvantages of years of institutionalized oppression have created yawning disparities in income and in wealth and in education and in health, in personal safety, in access to credit. Women and girls around the world continue to be blocked from positions of power and authority. They continue to be prevented from getting a basic education. They are disproportionately victimized by violence and abuse. They're still paid less than men for doing the same work. That's still happening.
This is an area not just South Africa is facing. I think a lot of our countries, we are all grappling with the issue of inequality, economic inequality, political inequality, and that what's important between Kenya and South Africa is that we have really strong constitutional frameworks. And if you look at both our countries, we enacted new constitutions within a 2-decade period. We've enacted new constitutions in peacetime through a long consultative, inclusive process. And they're very progressive instruments, and they actually give us the parameters on which to deal with inequality. So the political will now to use these these legislative frameworks to address inequality decisively through a consultative process is what we're seeing here in South Africa. I think this is an area that Kenya also has a lot to contribute to and to learn.
Thank you.
From the speeches and opinions of the locals here in South Africa, I cannot but conclude that the country is facing strange and uncertain times, and it's at times like these that the example of Nelson Mandela is so important. It always looks impossible until it's done. For me, that's what I'll remember Nelson Mandela for. I don't know about you, and that marks the end of our show. Thank you so much for watching. On behalf of the entire crew that has made this production possible, bye-bye for now from Johannesburg in South Africa, and see you next time.